Hello and welcome back. Unfortunately, as with happens with your live events from time to time, one of our speakers has not been able to make it today. So we're not going to be able to hear live from Amal Hussain. She's not going to be able to join us right now, but she will be recording her talk, The Good, the Bad and the Vulnerable, A Friendly Guide to Dependency Management at Scale. And that will be available on the NodeConf Remote YouTube channel later. So we're very, very lucky that at the very last minute, somebody has stepped in to do a talk. So we have Matteo Collina, the man with 5 billion downloads, and why are there no incentives for security in open source?
Hi everyone, I'm back here. I don't know. It was very unsurprised for me to deliver this talk as well as the previous one at this conference. It was very important for me to present a talk about Undici, but it's there was an opportunity, and basically I stepped in to fill in the slots. So as usual, follow me at Matteo Collina on Twitter. Please reach me out if you have any questions or whatever. I have prepared this talk on security and open source, following some of my input from a friend, and I recently delivered it at SneakCon 2020. So here you go, and I'm going to talk a little bit about security. So without no further ado, let's start. I don't see my slides. I know, fantastic. I see my slides now. Great. Here we go with the slides. So why there are no incentives for security in open source? So a couple of things about me. Again, I'm as always part of the technical steering committee on Node.js. Didn't change in the last 2 hours. And but as part of that, one of the things that we do, and you might not know this, we are also triaging Node.js core vulnerabilities. So we triage when we receive vulnerabilities about Node.js, we triage them, and we also fix them, of course. I also research and fix a few HTTP 1.1 denial of service attacks for Node.js, so I know the HTTP 1.1 spec fairly well, probably. Yeah, you probably question me. I will not know what you want, but whatever. I'm also whatever, but I have this dual thing about the community aspect and the consultant aspect. Note that again, I am still plan to reach 5 billion downloads in 2020 with my modules. So yeah. So I know a thing or two about security because it was fast on the previous talk. Now it's secure. You see. I have this nice slide which shows the balance that I need to keep to cater when helping clients and companies and maintaining the ecosystem. Security is such a big part of any runtime and any platform that you're using, and you want to take the security one of your first challenge when developing a new application or developing a new module as well. Note that most people don't care. So I've recently worked with a client where this word secure, nah, was not a thing. Okay, and they're working on it very hard to fix to rectify their problem, but yeah, no, that was a problem. Secure, no. Okay, so a lot of companies do this type of work, and they are in search for protection. There are unspecified attackers that want to access your data or do something nasty to you, your company, because they're jealous and envy, or maybe they just want to make money out of you and do some ransom. So you are in search for protection. The problem is that open source is always pictured as the tragedy of the commons, and let's dig a little bit into it because it's very important. Open source is one. Okay, so if you're developing software, you use open source. This is one of my favorite page, modulescount.com. I always take a snapshot of that and put it in slides most of the time. Note how many modules, how many dependencies are published everywhere between all of those registries. Look, well, this is npm. We all know that we like small modules, but even everybody else is publishing this, is publishing things, and so on. Is actually very important. So all those open source getting published means that all new software it's built on top of all the software companies is built on top of open source. But you might think open source code, but it's not really. It's also a bunch of other things. You need to have prototype, documentation, developer experience, releases, support, licensing, outreach, and so on and so forth, but also security, which is the focus. Note that this specific talk is not about, companies. So I am not talking about open source projects that are companies. Those are I'm not going to talk about them right now. There is a lot of open source projects that have a major company behind it that is actually selling it as its own product. We can name a few, which I'm not going to name them. So it's not a startup. Okay, I'm talking about open source projects that are maintained by volunteers that have a full community behind, where the leadership is not tied to one single vendor. And because one of the key part is that an open source project is as good as its community is. So open source, it's all about community. You need to have a good community to have a good open source project. So go back to our attack, to our attackers. Now, you see, the company is using open source, right? We have seen that, open source is one, and the company is, the code is public here. Now, the attacker can study the code and use that as an attack vendor. Hooray! They made some money. Okay? This is a problem. So there is a big desire for security and to raise a wall around our company's data or our company's system. And as usual, you have two choices, make versus buy. Now, I always recommend to buy. Usually, unless you are building a product to sell, buying it's actually cheaper than building. And you might want to pick one of our favorite vendors. There are a few of them, and I love them all. So pick the one that you like the most, and that you want to help protect the company. Hooray! So that's nice. And with that, you will be all secure together. Right. Okay. But is it all? Like, are the vendors enough to keep protecting my company? Well, not so. We are missing a very important link. So, in order to provide you very important to provide the company and you developers that develop products for them, you need to you need the open source dependencies, the open source libraries that you're going to use to be without security vulnerabilities. Who's going to fix the vulnerabilities? Well, likely the maintainers, right? So that fix vulnerabilities in the open source. Well, but the important part are the security researchers that are going to notify the maintainers, but study the open source dependencies with the same mindset of an attacker, and then notify the maintainers so that they can fix them. Hooray! Good, right? This is a virtuous cycle, because the result will be that the open source is kept fixed and maintained. Easily realistic. You see, this is like I really like this slide and this image. So there is the disclosure cycle is actually very important, and it's you can have two disclosure fix. One directly by the security researchers that will communicate to the vendor when if they were unable to get the maintainers to do a fix, or they will talk to the maintainers, work with them, and then the maintainers will do the disclosure of a fix to the vendors. This second cycle is actually very, very important because it actually ensures that the vulnerability is fixed to the best knowledge of the maintainer, which is great. Note that the vendor usually a good job in letting the clients, the companies know and keeping them secure. Okay. Now here is the full-blown security value chain. So let's recap this a little bit. So you have an attacker that wants to access data at a company. How does it do that? Well, it does that by studying open source dependencies, which are that you also use by the company. This is actually very simple to know which library, which open source things you're using. Okay, so whatever. So there is that. The company in turn who don't want this attack to happen, so really seek to some help from vendors to keep them their dependencies safe. Now the vendors themselves need to know what's vulnerable, So um, they need to have the disclosure of those vulnerabilities. Who's going to do that? Well, it's going to do the security researcher might do it if something is not being patched, or the maintainers are going to do it if we have a fix. Note that the maintainers fix the vulnerabilities, and after being notified by the researchers, which do the same type of study that the attackers do on the open source dependencies. So you might wonder, where are the incentives? Now, the title of the talk is where are the incentives, right? So let's try to understand who has some incentives. Now, the attackers have really some good incentives to do what they do. They are criminals, right? So they make money. They want to be kings and presidents, and they want to be, big bank accounts full of bitcoins. I don't know, or they have some political agenda. I don't know. Who knows? Okay, they do what they do. Maybe they just do it for fun, but not so much. The security vendors are make money by keeping companies safe, so they have all the incentives to keep they sell products, so they make money by keeping companies safe. And part of their job is to publish and notify companies about vulnerabilities. And they benefit when open source vulnerability is disclosed. So to some extent, they make money when you have open source vulnerability disclosed. If there are no open source vulnerability disclosed, we'll see why I'm paying this company to keep me safe. Okay, so that's it. The security researchers are often employed or sponsored and receive money through bounty programs. We have a couple of very interesting bounty programs, one for Node.js and one for the ecosystem that you might want to use. If you find a vulnerability on Node.js, you can actually receive a bounty. So you can, if you find it, you will receive, there's a bounty on them, and you will receive, I don't know, $250 or $200 or something like that. I don't know, I don't remember. But you can receive some money if you find one, or even more if it's a very, very serious one. So they also benefit when the open source vulnerability are disclosed, because it's they can also reuse that as their CV to land better jobs, or make themselves a name in the security community. So again, they have some incentives here. Note that if we go back here, we have talked about the company, which have incentives on its own. Of course, they're selling products, making money. You have the attackers, you have the security researchers. Oh, their maintainers are missing. Maintainers are usually not paid to maintain open source. Ouch. Most of the maintainers are not paid to do what they do. And they take pride in their work, and they love sharing code. They produce content, they produce stuff around. It's actually pretty nice. But to be honest, they're not paid for it. And they want to use their work, and they like to build new features on their stuff. They are builders. Most of the time, they are builders, not maintainers to some extent. They want to create new idea, pursue new avenues, and maintaining software is very hard and a lot of work. So also, because most maintainers, like if you are a company, you want the libraries you're using to be stable and be supported forever. And if you are a maintainer, a creator, you want to create new things. Okay, you don't really like maintaining old things. So unfortunately, maintainers have absolutely no incentives in doing any security work whatsoever. And this is a bad reality. So I just wanted to give a quick recommendation to all security researchers, and if you are into this community, it's actually very important. There is maintainers versus companies. This is a typical big divide, and typically companies care nothing about security. Well, they want to pay some money to make the problem go away, and they focus on making money, and they typically have full-time teams maintaining the products. So they have a product, and they can allocate significant resource to fix them if they want to. Maintainers, on the other hand, are mostly volunteers and focus on keeping the project healthy, and they're interested in keeping their users safe, but they have no time, they have no money, essentially. and that both security researchers and maintainers are on the same side. You want to be there, they want to, well, you should work hand in hand and don't see them as antagonists. I have seen some very nasty language from security researchers from time to time of, if you don't do anything, I would go and shame all your work and so on. Don't do that, okay? Especially when you're dealing with a project which is mostly maintained by volunteers. You should, take, how can I help to make this project more secure? Not, you should do this, and that, otherwise I will shame you publicly, essentially. Note that this applies only to open source project. If you're talking to a vendor and the open source product that you are using, that you are targeting, is actually built by a company, sure, high hem to a higher bar. They have plenty of resources. Otherwise, please, everybody, let's work together in fixing those vulnerabilities. I would also like to thank the community of researchers to keep everybody safe. And I will just say a big thank you to everybody. I kind of rushed it through, so I hope that Katie has some questions for me that we can go and keep talking about things. So here we go. Anyway, if you are willing to, if you need some help in your Node.js, if you need some help with your Node.js, please reach out. I am Matteo Collina. You can reach me at Matteo Collina on Twitter, and this is my email, matteo.collina@nearform.com. So please reach out if you need any help with your JavaScript strategy and how you want to improve your JavaScript deployment, pipeline security, and so on and so forth. We can help you do all of that. And we've done all of that so many times for our own clients. Thank you. Hey, Katie, sorry, I did rush through my talk. So as you can see, I did not prepare this, so I was a little bit in a hurry to put it I basically jumped it and jumped it on stage. So hopefully everybody liked it. I don't know. I don't have a slide open, so maybe you can, you know the feeling on the room.
I've got a few questions. Well, I've got a question for you here already from Naggur, I think. I think that's how to pronounce it. What if maintainers got paid for consulting for vendors and vendors are delivering fixes to companies whilst contributing to OSS?
So a couple of things. Is not normally is not easy for all for all maintainers to receive money because of contract obligations on because of their employer. In certain countries like the US, you might not be able to receive money outside of your main employment contract. Then you can have problems for receiving money from abroad or whatever. Again, you might not be set up to be essentially a freelancer. If you want to accept money and be okay with your taxes, you actually need to be set up as a freelancer in your company, in your country. So all of that might not be worthwhile, and it requires a significant harder it's a bigger problem than your normal day-to-day activity, essentially, as a developer. Now, apart from that, so that's one reason. Of course, companies should put money into doing their work. Okay, so companies should definitely put their money into developing the fixes if they can find them. So that's important, super important. So let's do that. Okay, if you find that vulnerability, if one of your developers, security researcher, or whatever, find a vulnerability, please let them help in fixing that. Most of the time, people don't. Most of the bugs that we find don't have a patch. They don't even have a hint on how that could be fixed. So it's actually very hard. So please help. We need you.
So what would be the first steps to helping them? What would be sort of your ideal path, and how would you grow this community of maintainers?
So from my point of view, you're missing one of the things that's missing is the need for a need of shared ownership project and shared ownership of the eggs to ship them. If you're using some open source and you find a bug, you should enable your developers, your teams to contribute back. You are receiving a lot from that, and if you find a bug, it's on you to fix it, essentially. And this is kind of the main that will lead to a better community for us all and better software for us all.
Yeah, I think that traditionally it has been so easy for companies to go, oh, I'm using that, but I'll fork it at that point rather than contribute a fix back. I will fork and put my own patches in, and it happens. And it's about making people aware that it isn't a high barrier to entry to contribute things back. It's not a difficult process. It's just something you have to put a bit of effort into. And I think that that's the part of the trouble, is not everybody engages in the right way.
No, not really, unfortunately.